Okay, so anyway, in Hebrew, the word grace has a very different connotation than it's going to when we get into the New Testament study of this word. Does anybody know what grace is in an Old Testament context?
Yes, but I forgot.
It's the word favor. It's the word I show you favor, or I show you preference, or I show you love, respect. I mean, that's favor. And it's used 69 times in the Old Testament, and 53 of those times it's going to be about the favor, predominantly the favor God shows towards man. So, before we even get into it, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself, what are some examples of God showing favor to man?
Well, you mentioned in the Old Testament, in the reading, Joseph in prison. We wouldn't think of that as being, in favor, and yet we see the outcome because God was with him there. And what Genesis 39 is part of the reading, that the baker and the cupbearer, I think, saw the wisdom that he had. So, an example.
Okay. How?
We see in creation that him designing man after his own self.
Bruce?
Genesis 6, Noah found favor.
It's the one that was in my top of my head. Yeah, Noah found favor in the eyes of the Lord. Anybody else? David. Yeah, and David, of course, is always incredible because David was a man who was not really worthy of it by our estimation, but God found him worthy.
It doesn't come to mind, but in Genesis 12, does it said that Abraham found favor with God?
Well, Abraham did. I don't remember if there's specifically a verse that says that, uses this word in that connotation, but I mean, clearly he did. Well, there's a whole bunch of them. I don't remember. These are all people that found favor. Whether or not the verse specifically says that, I don't remember, but you're right. That is the favor that we're talking about that God found. Although they suffered trials, they found favor in that God either protected them or allowed good things to come from it. Never forget, finding favor in the eyes of the Lord doesn't always come with great things for us, but it comes with great things for His kingdom, and we have to be willing to accept that and understand that. The other 11 times in the Old Testament, it's talking about describing an individual's charm, how the kindness, the gentleness with which a person reaches out. Now, in the New Testament, the word changes. In the New Testament, the word translated grace is charis, and it refers to a gift or an act of benevolent goodwill. What do we normally call it? Unmerited favor. It's a gift that we don't deserve, but yet God gives it to us anyway, just because He loves us, just because He cares. It can be the effect of generosity in the New Testament. It occasionally refers to the generosity we have for, the gratitude we have for generosity. So the love we show God back would be translated in Greek as charis, or grace, or love. So that's kind of the foundational look at it. Now, again, we normally say unmerited favor. When you ask the kids at camp, that's always the first thing that they say. Jack Lewis, who is a Bible scholar within the Churches of Christ and professor at Freed-Hardeman for many years, Jack Lewis says this: the wide span of meanings that this word has makes it imperative that one gives special attention to any particular passage when you're dealing with the use of that word. Otherwise, you are likely to attribute a writer with an idea that he did not have in making that word. Basically what he's saying is, because we use one word so often in English to mean so many different things, we've talked about degrees of love. I love my dog. I love my children. Same word, vastly, they're pretty close, but vastly different meanings. Then you need to be very careful when you read the context and the connotation of a verse to ensure you're interpreting it rightly. Now, we have one specific word that translators back in the 1600s did not properly interpret the word. Instead, and here's your hint, they transliterated the word that changed doctrine in English forever. What word is that?
Baptism.
Baptism. They took the Greek word baptizo, which means to immerse or plunge, and they transliterated it for one specific reason. Who knows your history? Why? Because King James did not believe in immersion baptism. He had been sprinkled, therefore he would not allow the direct translation of the word. Instead, because they were afraid of him, scholars transliterated it to say baptize. And so, that shows if you misinterpret a word because you're using an English understanding. Now, I don't believe, there's nothing I hate worse, and I know we're doing a lot of it in this study, and there's a purpose, but I just hate preachers that get up and want to throw out a lot of Hebrew and Greek, just, to say, look at me, look at what I've studied, look what I've done. But it is still important for us, if you're not 100% sure the meaning of the word, look it up. There's so many tools available. We talked about that a few weeks ago. But commentaries are online now. My library is obsolete because it's all available to you. So looking it up in a way that it gives you the word dictionary for the Greek or the Hebrew will give you a broader understanding of it. So there's many, many meanings. Grace can be joy, pleasure, delight, sweetness, charm, loveliness. In English, it can be loving kindness. It can be favor. It can be merciful kindness of God towards us. Or the merciful kindness of God turning us back to God. So what is due to grace? The spiritual condition of ourselves governed by the power of God's grace. Our condition in the world is due to grace. Now, what does that mean? Seriously. Our spiritual condition is due to God's grace. What does that mean?
Well, it means without His grace, we would be lost.
His salvation, our salvation
Yes.
is because of His grace. By His grace, He sent Christ to be our salvation.
Correct.
It means that everything that we are or have in both the spiritual and physical sense is because of the grace. If you read 2 Samuel 22, where David talks about his deliverance and all the things that he got from God, it is impossible to read that and not understand that everything I have and am is because of God's grace.
So, without God, what would be our spiritual condition? Perish, lost. We have no hope, no chance outside of God. Hey, Bruce, by the way. See, there is one. Anyway, he couldn't find a pointer this morning. Just wanted to let him know there's one laying there all the time. Okay, so anyway, no, we're gone back beyond that. No comments. Okay, so grace is also a token or proof of grace. It's the benefits that we derive from it is the token or the proof of grace. What is the number one benefit we derive from grace? Salvation. What are other benefits that we derive as Christians that the world cannot know besides salvation?
Peace of mind.
Peace of mind, excellent. Direction, yes. How?
We have a love for God's community that comes to us and goes out from us because of it.
Yes, love for God's community, coming and going.
Purpose of life.
Purpose of life. It goes with direction. Yes, absolutely. Now, I mentioned this to Carl yesterday. We were having lunch, and I was talking about our church in Germany back in the early 80s. And I said that was just one of the most incredible churches, and it probably did more for Alice and I's spiritual lives as much as anything. Because when you live overseas, you have no family, no friends when you get there, and yet when you're a child of God and you walk into a church, you instantly have family. You instantly have friends. And they just took us in and they overwhelmed us with love. And because of that, I believe our spirituality grew just... And the reason is the different setting. One, we didn't have TV. We have one channel, AFRTS TV. You have one channel, so you weren't watching TV. We didn't have a lot of libraries available, so we didn't have a lot of books sitting around to read. And you didn't have family to run to, you know, the distractions we have in America. So we flocked to the church family. Nights, we always ate with another couple, members of the church. Weekends, we spent with a large group together at our missionaries' home. You know, Sundays were worship, and then a picnic when the weather was nice. And that is a benefit, a direct benefit of being a Christian. Guiltless fellowship. You know, it's a wonderful thing. And then God's gifts of grace are the benefits or the bounty that we get there. What's one way that God's bounty is described in human terms?
Pressed down, running over.
That's exactly what I was thinking. Press down. That's the one we can understand the most. You fill a basket, you press it down, and then you cover it until it pours out. That's the bounty of God's grace. And so here we get the kind of gist of it. Now we'll look at some of the scriptures that go with it. And we kind of looked at the word itself. The source of salvation, the attribute of God's nature. We're going to look at some verses. Jack Cottrell, another minister, another writer of concordances, he provided a helpful list of 3 connotations for the term grace. 1, it is the source of salvation. 2, it is the content of salvation. And 3, it is the way that we get salvation. So it's the source, it's the content, and it's the way. And he says in contemporary Christianity, we tend to think of it only as saving grace. Just that word. But he says it's more than that. It goes deeper. So Romans 9:16. Who would like to read? Read off the wall if you want, or off your Bible. Okay, Steve?
So then it does not depend on the man who wills or the man who runs, but on God who has mercy.
So it doesn't depend on what you want or what you do. It is dependent on God who has mercy. How can you say, okay, again, we'll go back to Bible class, and if you miss it, you miss some good lessons, but if you go back to Jeremiah, how can you say God has grace and mercy when you read the book of Jeremiah?
Well, he over and over asks them to turn, and he will relent. I mean, he continues. If it was based on, because they've been, I'm going to say, evil for years upon years or generations, he would have just shut them off right then. But he says, if you will turn, I will relent.
Even in the time of Noah, he gave them 100 more years, 120. Bruce, how does almost every chapter in Jeremiah, kind of paraphrase, how does that first verse start?
The word of the Lord came to Jeremiah.
And then he basically says, go tell the people, or go tell someone, whether it's the rulers of the people, or, whatever. Go tell this. He's begging them not to do it. Okay, so how many did you count to when your kids were bad? 3 was my max. I don't count above, I don't know how to count. I do sound. I can't say but test 1, 2, 3. I can't count beyond 3 when my kids were bad. I don't know about you. God counts, what we just say, how many chapters? 31?
52.
52 in Jeremiah? Boy, Bob, we were both wrong this morning. We didn't look. We were just, I think it's 36, 31. Okay, so 52 basically times God says, go say one more number to them. And they don't listen. They didn't get it. So let's look at another one. So Romans 9:16 was the source of salvation. Let's look at the content of our salvation. Who's got that? Acts 11:17. Okay, Josh.
Therefore God gave to them the same gift as he gave to us also after believing in the Lord Jesus Christ. Who was I that I could stand in God's way?
So, just based on that verse alone, what do you think the author's saying there? It's the content. So what is that content there? If he gave it to me, what? He can give it to you. Who am I to say you're not entitled? Whether Jew or Gentile, whether free or slave, who am I to say you're not entitled to this? And then his plan for it, the way of, or direction that he does it. John 3:16, who's got it? You all know it. Okay, Bob.
For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but have eternal life.
No, it's so well you read it too fast then. Yeah. So what is the way that he saved us, Bob?
Jesus.
Jesus. He gave his Son. So the way is, he gave his Son. We must believe. That is the way. That is the direction. That's the GPS to get you there. Now let's talk about Paul's descriptions of it. More than any other writer, Paul talks about grace as a term to describe the event that saves. I mean, Galatians 2:21, it's not just a quality possessed by God, it's actually a message proclaimed by God through the death of Jesus. Someone read this verse for me. Jeff?
I do not nullify the grace of God, for if righteousness comes through the law, then Christ died needlessly.
So here it's like, it's not a quality, it's a message. His death was a message that the law is not what saves you. It's telling us that. In Romans 5, Paul's going to emphasize salvation comes from grace and not from keeping that law. Steve, you want to read that one?
Therefore, having been justified by faith, we have peace with God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom also we have obtained our introduction by faith into this grace in which we stand and in which we exult in the hope of the glory of God.
So, again, how do we remember the theological term justified? Just as if I. Just as if I had done this. So, he's saying, it comes from God's grace. It's just as if I died, just as if I had done it, but I didn't. God did. He's also careful to stress in chapter 6, verse 1, that it doesn't allow us to do whatever we want. I stressed this Wednesday night, I think, and I may have stressed it last Sunday. What do we say then? Are we to continue in sin so that grace or forgiveness in this context may increase? No. No. We don't do that. Now that goes back to what I said in the beginning. And grace is also our demonstration of thanksgiving to God, of appreciation to God. So here, God's given us grace that forgives, so show your grace by not increasing your sin to make Him show more. Don't do that to Him. It's just selfishness. It's mean. So for Paul, grace doesn't mean grace means we don't rely on what we did, but it also means we're not free to do whatever we want. The giver of grace has all authority in our life. So, some more verses. We're going to look at some Old Testament, some New Testament uses of it. So let's get some readers. Genesis 39:21. Who wants to read that for me? Okay, Bruce, take the quick one because there's a long one.
I have a question, but it's sort of an annual response. I'd like to hear you talk some. I know.
Go for it.
But I think
Blank slate.
it's sort of interesting. The one in Acts 11, he's looking back what happened in Acts 10. So he says the Holy Spirit had fallen on them. So who am I to say?
Right.
He could tell that the grace of God was with them because they had the same gift he had.
Correct.
Is there not a way we can tell today without a miraculous or a direct contact of the Holy Spirit upon a person to know that somebody is in the grace of God?
You know, we're told that the indwelling of the Holy Spirit is a mark on the Christian. So, biblically it says that we have something about us. So if we go back and use the connotation of grace being our thanksgiving, our gift back to God, then by our what does the world know who we are? By our actions. Now I told you this morning about the hospital ship. And they said that they do not restrict worship of people that they serve. They don't serve just Christians. They'll serve voodoo worshipers, Islamic worship, Islam, Christian faiths of all whatevers, because their actions speak louder than their words would if they said, stop this. Were you with Gail at this concert she was talking about at lunch today? They went to a concert. It was Christian-based music, the concert. And a man is outside yelling at them through a megaphone that abortion was evil. And Gail said her comment to the friend who was with her was, you're preaching to the choir. His actions, if you were just say, based on what he's doing, yelling at other people of like faith, a hateful, overly powerful message, what would your mark of him be that you see? Not loving. Talked about this morning a little bit. Judgmental. Yeah. The mark of a Christian that Paul, in their day, they were given miraculous gifts. Did those gifts last beyond when he baptized them? We don't know. If they weren't necessary, they didn't. If they were necessary to help prove his point, further they would have. But for us, your actions tell the world who you are. Remember what I said on my fridge? First thing I see every time I get something out of there to drink. Everyone would rather see a sermon than hear a sermon. And that's true. So Genesis 39:21, you have to read it now, Bruce, because I told you to. And this is the one that was brought up earlier.
I was just told it's the first book.
It's not. Well, the book is, yes. Sorry.
39:21. But the Lord was with Joseph and extended kindness to him and gave him favor in the sight of the chief jailer.
Now, that allowed Joseph in a position to do something to glorify God. But what else? When it says God showed kindness, wait a minute, he's still in prison. How is he showing him kindness there? Well, I would say it resulted in an easier life imprisonment. And it may have been house arrest at that point. Because the favor he showed and the authority he was given while still a prisoner, he probably was not sitting in a jail cell. He was probably at least free to, like in the warden's house type concept. So there's that one. How about Psalm 84, 10 through 12? Ron?
For a day in your courts is better than 1,000 outside. I would rather stand at the threshold of the house of my God than dwell in the tents of wickedness. For the Lord God is a sun and shield. The Lord gives grace and glory. No
You heard the old saying, I'd be satisfied with a shack in the far back corner of heaven if I can get there. Now that's what this verse is really saying. I would be happy to stand outside looking in just because God is so good. Just give me a seat outside the door looking in at the threshold because God is so good. Now that goes to what Bruce asked again. That's another one of those marks, is how the Christian responds to God's gifts, whatever they, how big or small. The way the Haitians just mob us and hug us, and when they get a little Ziploc bag with some sewing items, so a little bit of thread, a couple needles, and a tape measure. How happy they are, how joyous. The look on the people, when we went there and did those surgeries, the joy that these Christians had, because they never thought in their life they would have the funds to have this surgery. And they didn't, but God did. And if I remember, 50-something women were given some life-saving surgeries and some just a level of comfort that they never would have had without God's grace to you in Freeport. Bruce?
This is part of what I was trying to touch on in class this morning. Understanding when God is active in your life. So many times He does not take away the situation, such as maybe a death in the family. He doesn't bring them back to life. But He inserts something into your life that eases some of that pain and allows you to deal with it. You were talking about Haiti. Remember the guy when we were down there last and they were doing the eyeglass thing? And they put the old gentleman up and was making the adjustments and finally got him some glasses. And he says, I can see. Can you imagine if we were doing no mission work at all, that man would go that way for his whole life.
And remember his second thing he said. He gave God the glory.
Yeah.
Thank God I can see.
Now that's how we become an agent to fulfill a purpose of God. He doesn't bring something from heaven. He says, I need you to go do this. Without telling us, we go do these things, and I think He's directive in some of these needs. And this man now can see as a Christian. So
I try to tell you guys and bring you up to date when things happen, but I am so privileged sometimes to see how God works in roundabout ways. And so many times I tell you the end result, and you miss out on something. So if I didn't tell you, I'll go back to that again. Haitian, not the eyeglass clinic, but the OBGYN surgeries. Nikolai said, I kind of like to do this. And he said, the University of Illinois will let me take some med students, some third-year med students. Well, that's great. So we asked him, you guys came up with money. That's great. But the hospital at that time had a flood in their storage area. The basement flooded at the hospital. And so they initially said, we're going to give you $250,000 worth of some equipment that we can't use anymore. And I was on such a high, and I was so grateful to God. And then their insurance company said, oh no, we're going to take those to the dump, to the trash. You cannot have them because we would be liable. So the insurance company in the hospital said, if you give them to them, we're not going to give you your money back on them. And two, it's a liability. They can't have them. Ooh, insurance. Anyway, so, and so now I'm on a low, oh, this is horrible. But then I got a call from the Dr. Perry, who ran the hospital at that time. And he had talked to Dr. Geller and Dr. Mary, who were both very good friends of Karen Harbach's dad. And Karen's dad said, look, they're wanting to do this, and this is a really good thing. And those two went to Dr. Perry. And he called me into his office, and I went one day, and he said, I'm so sorry we can't give you those things. I'm like, thanks, just rub it in a little bit more. And he said, but I've purchased $50,000 worth of surgical OB trays, OBGYN surgical trays for you. They're downstairs, just sign for them. Gave them to us. Brand new. about, I think it was 4 or 5 sets or 10 sets, tray of everything the surgeon needs to do, one complete, like tumor removal, you know, work on, I don't know, I'm going to try to say those words anymore. Gestational diabetes, I can say I remember that one. No, but all these things, and I sat back and I went, I was here. The bottom line was, God knew that rules and regulations weren't going to let us do what somebody wanted to do. So he worked it till it worked out okay. I didn't get as much, but I got great. And by the way, I also walked through and they looked at everything I had with me except the briefcase in my hand. And they taxed me on stupid stuff. And I walked right through the airport with $50,000 in a briefcase that they could have taxed me for. And they didn't.
I think that's a great example too of God answering a prayer before starting to answer years before, because if Karen's dad had been a different person and not had that influence, none of that probably would have happened either. And I think we need to think about that with how we act out in the world, because God may be using us to fulfill someone's prayer 50 years down the road or whatever.
Well, and more than just his behavior in the ER, was his behavior in the mission field for the Mennonite church, doing surgery and stuff, because he had said, I have seen people like this. I know what they need. So, you never know. Okay, so, some more verses. Romans 3:23 through 26. Someone read this.
For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, being justified as a gift by his grace through the redemption which is in Jesus Christ, whom God displayed publicly as a propitiation in his blood through faith. This was to demonstrate his righteousness, because in the forbearance of God he passed over the sins previously committed. For the demonstration, I say, of his righteousness as the present time, so that he would be just and the justifier of the one who has faith in Jesus.
So I love that last verse. He was just and the justifier. Basically what that's saying is, so when the time was right, God declared a do-over. I'm forgiving everything past in Christ for righteous people. That is not for everyone, but for the righteous. I'm forgiving that because if I don't forgive that, I'm not just. And now I will justify you, so I remain just going forward. So a great understanding of that gift of grace that we've been given. Let's jump ahead here. We'll run out of time for our word here. So, how can man be made right in the sight of God? Romans 3:20. Because of the works of law, no one will be justified in his sight. For through the law comes a knowledge of sin. Paul's asking the question, how can man be made right? His answer is not through the law. That doesn't do it. So what shall I say? Shall we continue to sin so that grace increases? His answer is, grace is doing this, but don't anger God in this. You know, he emphasizes we must be obedient. He's saying you can't depend just on grace. You have a work to do as well. You have obedience. Your work doesn't save you, but your work, the work tells God he's justified in what he did with you, through you, so that way we can be in the right before God through his grace. You know, I changed batteries today. So, for while we were still helpless, at the right time, Christ died for the ungodly. For one would hardly die for a righteous man, though perhaps for a good man someone might dare even to die. But God demonstrates his own love towards us, in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Much more then, having now been justified by his blood, we shall be saved from the wrath of God through him. For if while we were enemies, we were reconciled to God through the death of his Son, much more, having been reconciled, we shall be saved by his life. We have been made right through God through this grace, this gift, this way of thought of God. There was a man, Norbert Reinhardt. He owned Terra Mundo Drilling, and they were down in Colombia. I don't know if any of you remember this story. It's a pretty old story, 1998. But anyway, one of the employees, Ed Leonard, had just gotten down there. And one of the number one ways the drug cartels make money before you start traveling in South America is kidnapping for ransom, especially people with companies. So, Ed Leonard was taken as a hostage. He lived in the Andes Mountains as this hostage, moved around from camp to camp, lost about 21 pounds, and he, by the way, he was skinny before. His captors demanded $500,000 from this drilling company. Now, he had never met the owner of this company, ever. Didn't know who he was. On October 6th, the owner of the company contacted them and said, "We will pay. But more than that, while we're getting that together, I want to take his place so that you know my company will pay." And he switched places with an employee he had never met. Low level, what do they call those guys that just work the rigs? Huh? Yeah, riggers, yeah, the riggers that just work in the dirty, nasty job on the rig. Never met him, and now all of a sudden he switches places with him. Reinhardt, when he got to because they wouldn't let him go until Reinhardt was in their camp. He walked up to him, shook his hand, and said, "Your shift's over, go home." Now he told reporters when he was interviewed, there is no way to put in words when somebody gives their life for you. Well, for us, that word is defined in one word: grace. Jesus put his life on the line for us. He eventually got home safely to his family as well. So, a quote here: "Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again, the gift which must be asked for, the door at which we must knock." It's costly because you're called to follow and you're called to place yourself into slavery. Like that man I talked about this morning that said he'd been made a slave of his physical condition. You've been made a slave by choice to God. And you're supposed to live that way and act that way, that you have no more. It's costly because it condemns sin. It's grace because it justifies the sinner. It cost Jesus blood. And above all, it's costly because God gave his only begotten Son. So often we think of them in terms of Father and Son, and they're not. Because they're the Godhead. They are one. God gave himself in the form of a Son. You know, we're just blown away when somebody gives a kidney. Knowing that, if something happens to your other one, you just gave up your life. We're amazed when we'd say it's great when somebody dies and they give organs. It's like, I'm dead, I don't need them. You can have them. But think about God that gave a third of himself in the form of his Son to die. He gave a third of himself. And every time we sin, we reopen those wounds again. We just do it all over again. So, God didn't reckon the cost of his Son to be too much to bear. Any questions or comments on grace?